Good morning, everyone. Let me start with a simple question. When you watch the news, scroll through Instagram, or even send a WhatsApp message, what exactly is happening in terms of communication? How do messages travel and how do they shape the way we see the world? Today, we are going to explore some key models and theories of communication that help us answer these questions. Laswell's model, the Shannon Weaver model, and cultivation theory, as well as agenda setting theory. By the end, you will be able to not only describe these concepts, but also apply them to real examples from the media you use every day. So let's take a look at the pictures. How does the news about Ahmad Sahroni being an easy target for influencers and journalists? The sudden rise of Salsa Ervina, for example, after successfully embarrassing Ahmad Sahroni, proves that mass media communication is an extraordinary tool to rally support for a particular cause. So we will review two major issues. The first one is two kinds of communication models from Laswell's and Shannon Weaver. And the second one is the two kinds of communication theory, that is cultivation theory and agenda setting theory. Now let's begin with one of the earliest models of communication theory, that is Laswell's model. It was studied in 1948. It's often summarized in a single question: who says what, in which channel, to whom, with what effect? This model highlights five key elements. The first is certainly communicator, the sender of the message. The second one is always the message, the content itself. And the third is certainly the channel, the medium, like TV, radio, print, and social media. And the fourth is audience as receivers. And the last, the effect or the outcome of the impacts. Now let's take a look at one particular example. Imagine a public health campaign on Instagram. You know who produced or issued this kind of post? Well, it should be the government, right? And what does it say? The infographic says something that vaccines help your immune system fight infections of the COVID 19 faster, right? And who is the audience? Suddenly, because the channel is Instagram, it's directed to young adults. To whom? And what is the goal? The goal is to increase vaccine uptake. That's the effect. So, just to recap, Laswell model is simple and certainly linear. It's useful for analyzing mass communication, and it doesn't really explain feedback or interaction. That's where later models come in. The second model is from Shannon Weaver. You call it Shannon Weaver model, right? So let's take a look more deeply on this. It was developed in 1949 for particular uh, increasing industry, that's telephone engineering, right? But interestingly enough, it is also applicable to human communication. So let's take a look how it works. First, there is an information source that creates a message. That's the encoder, right? So the transmitter codes it into signals. And then the channel carries the signal. But there may be noise that disrupts it. The receiver decodes the signal back into a message, and finally it reaches the destination. So let's take a look an example of a particular class where a professor gives instruction, right? He speaks into a microphone, for example, as a transmitter, and the sound travels through speakers as channel. But outside of the building, the construction noise outside interrupts with a lot of loud noises, right? The students hear and interpret, that means they become the receiver and then act on it, the destination. The Shannon Weaver model is valuable. Why? Because it introduces the idea of noise and highlights the importance of clear encoding and decoding. But again, its linear or real life communication often involves feedback loops. Now we are going to move to the next slide, especially related to the cultivation theory. So this is very interesting, I would assume, with these pictures um, related to the cultivation theory. Now let's shift from communication models to media theories. The first one is cultivation theory developed by George Gerbner. The central idea is simple. The more time people spend consuming media, especially television, the more likely they are to perceive reality in ways that reflect what they see on screen. So, the more you watch movies, the more you will follow what is presented there. Now, Gardner called this the mean world syndrome. So, for example, heavy viewers of crime dramas or sensational news may come to believe the world is far more violent than it really is. So, just to recap what happened before I spent my time studying in the US, I thought that the US living is just like in movies, you know, a lot of shootings, a lot of crimes over here and over there. But that only happens on the screen and certainly happens in a very, very limited area, but not in the United States in general. So, because I was exposed to TV shows, and also movies, I happened to get overwhelmingly limited by that. Now, let's bring this to today's context. If you spend hours scrolling TikTok or Instagram, do you start to believe that everyone is rich, beautiful, or constantly traveling? That's cultivation at work. The media cultivates a certain worldviews. This theory reminds us that media doesn't just entertain, it subtly shapes our long term perceptions. Now, take a look at the pictures. The collage of pictures clearly shows how Instagram posts are often less than authentic. People spend a great deal of time trying to look perfect in front of the camera. Since the iPhone introduced the front facing camera in 2010, more and more users have relied on auto beautifying tools to enhance their appearance. As a result, fake news, fake images have become part of our daily consumption. Now let's get moving to the next theory that's called agenda setting theory. This was proposed by McCombs and Shaw in the 1970s. The message is very clear. Media doesn't tell us what to think, but what to think about. Now, agenda setting theory tells us that the media doesn't tell us what to think, but it tells us what to think about. Now, let's take a look at this particular headlines from Compass.com, right? The issues highlighted in the news shape our sense of what matters most at the given time. So, you pay attention to the detail here that the top stories include several political issues, two looters of Ibu Sri Mulyani's house who pretended to return their loot. That's the area of politics, right? And the next one is Prabowo's claim to of knowing the masterminds behind the case. That's another politics. And next is the return of Ahmad Charoni's 11 billion rupiah Richard Mills watch. So Richard Mills is so expensive. You cannot imagine how much money, how much wealth you need to buy for this very luxurious stuff, you know. And the next one is Kaisang being sidelined politically. Even there is one international sports story, that's Eric Ten Hag being fired by Leverkusen, the overwhelming spotlight is on political drama that is currently taking place in August and early September 2025. So, by the way, what does this tell us? Compasscom is setting the public agenda by putting political scandals and controversies front and center. As readers, we might conclude that politics is the most urgent or important thing happening in Indonesia today simply because it dominates the headline. That's the power of agenda setting. It's not that the media forces us to adopt certain opinions, but by choosing which issues to cover and emphasize, it powerfully shapes the topics we discuss, argue about, and even worry over. So, to recap, Laswell's model gives us a simple way to ask who says what, through which channel, to whom, and with what effect. Meanwhile, the Shannon Weaver model adds the idea of encoding, decoding, and one of the most important thing is the noise. The cultivation theory shows us how long term media exposure shapes our worldview. And the last but not the least, the agenda setting theory explains how media directs our attention to certain issues. Together, these models and theories give us a toolkit to analyze how communication works and how media influences us. Here's my final challenge. The next time you scroll through your feed or watch the news and keep asking yourself, right? What model explains what is happening here and which theories help you understand how our perception of the world is being shaped. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to hearing your reflections in class. Bye bye.